Right, I think we'll get going. I think the numbers have kind of started to stabilise now. So welcome to today's webinar that is on around the 3 non-stackable supplements in Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier for woodland improvement. I'm Penny Oliver, the Head of Environmental Land Management Schemes for the Forestry Commission. Just going to cover a few kind of housekeeping elements that Becca's also put into the chat as well. So we're going to run for an hour and a half. We're going to have at least 30 minutes at the end for questions. On questions, please use the Q&A feature in Teams, please. And so please don't put them in the webinar chat. And then so there's a little illustration here. So don't use the chat, please use the Q&A. And once you put a question in there, and if you see other questions that are similar, please can you use the uptick option in the Q&A to upvote those questions rather than liking them, please. So what, Lucy, did you have something around sound? Is the sound okay? People can just put in the chat if the sound's all right.
Somebody said that they've got an echo. But yeah, I think it might.
Okay.
I think it's just one person who's got some thumbs up.
Okay, that's fine. I shall crack on. So hopefully people kind of pick that up about using the Q&A function rather than chat function. If people do have any problems with the Q&A function, we'll try and keep a. Can't hear anything.
Penny, I think if you want to carry on, I'll be in the chat so I can try and support those people who are having any issues.
Okay, and they're not being able to see the Q&A function. So I think there's something I think you sent out, didn't you, Becca, on the invite about how to join. Okay, because I think it works better on a computer rather than a phone. So, but if people can't, then we'll try and monitor the chat and put them into the Q&A function. But please use it by Q&A if you can. We will be focusing answering the questions around the topics today, rather than other things to do with CS Higher Tier. We did have a species webinar that we ran before Christmas, and there's a recording of that, so we won't be covering that today. But we will be putting a survey into the chat towards the end of today's webinar that will give you opportunity to ask and maybe raise other things you want us to cover in future as well. So we are recording today's webinar, and we'll be sharing the link to that afterwards. So over to you, Rich.
Thank you, Penny, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Richard Hoffman. I'm one of the ELM development managers that's been working on the development of some of the new options. And before we go into what we're calling internally the non-stackable supplements, but the reality is they can be stacked with other things, just not with themselves. But we'll cover a bit more about that in detail. Many of you may have seen this slide in the past. This is to kind of go through the general shape of the new woodland offer for CS Higher Tier. So on the left there, you've got our woodland management plan. This is hinting at the fact that the woodland management plan is a prerequisite for most of the woodland options, and the detail that's in your plan should make narrative sense with the things that you then do in your higher tier application. At the top, we've got that base action. So this is the CWD2, this is the woodland improvement option. And on top of this is where you start to layer other options that are kind of more about the specific things you may want to do during your agreement. So that first layer, we've got in green, we've got the things we're talking about today. These are the non-stackable supplements. In other words, you can have other things with them, but you can only have one of those on a particular piece of land. Although it should be said, you can have more than one of these things in green across your holding, just not on top of themselves. So that's our manage native woodland, including ancient semi-natural woodland supplement. There's also the PAWS restoration supplement and the improve woodland resilience supplement. Those are in that green layer. Then the yellow, this is not an exhaustive list. Please check gov.uk for other things that are available to you, but these are the things that can be added on top of both the base action on its own and in some instances also on top of the the non-stackables. These are things that are quite specific and are often feature specific. So just to pick one, for illustration purposes, historic features. Not all woodlands will have ancient monuments or scheduled or historic sites as part of them. Some may, and if you do, there's support for them. So please look at gov.uk for what else is available in the offer, but there are things in that optional layer. The things in red, these are mostly going to be used in conjunction with other options, the base option particularly, but there are some niche situations where they can stand alone. We're not going to go into those today, but again, gov.uk should and conversations with your woodland officer should help around those things. And then very last, but by no means least on this slide, is capital items at the bottom. Capital items will, in many instances, be important to support the objectives of your higher tier application, and you can do that either through standalone capital funding streams or as part of your higher tier application itself. So please go and find out some more about those bits and pieces. Having just jumped over a slide, this slide is sort of for those of you that are old hands at woodland improvement grants in CS, you may recognize some of these prescription numbers, these P2000, P2001, etc., down the left-hand side there. Our old option that started back in 2015, Woodland Improvement, WD2, used to have all of these prescriptions as part of it. And often what would happen when people entered into agreements, there would be a conversation with woodland officers and applicants to decide which of these were most relevant, and indeed which of these could be delivered against as part of that original payment. Because there was often quite a lot of trade-off, I suppose. It was the original payment was only £100 a hectare. It was quite difficult to get all of these accomplished, even if they were things that people wanted to do. So we've split them out into lots of different options, which enables people to be paid more proportionally and fairly for the things they actually want to accomplish, and not have the burden of doing things they don't. So in the top here, we've got the grey. The grey things are the things that have been retained in the base action, what we had at the top of our graph, our slide before. With the exception of that P4006, that was a monitoring report that used to be necessary to complete every year. It was quite a large spreadsheet that detailed the work that you'd done. That is no longer required, but many of those other things have come forward into what is now the base action. Going on to the green, these are prescriptions that we've taken from that base and moved into the supplements that we're talking about today, the non-stackables. And a lot of these things are quite site specific and weren't useful in all cases, but when they are useful, they really are. So it's nice to be able to try and encourage people to do the right things and to reward them for doing so. The one that I'll draw quick attention to here is the one at the very bottom of the green, that P2004, the Implement Silvicultural Transformation. This is the one that has morphed into the Resilience Supplement. And for better or worse, we'll come back to this, but for better or worse, we've made the language simpler, calling it the Resilience Supplement, but it has caused some confusion, and I just wanted to take a beat to note that really that supplement is about silvicultural transformation, but we're going to talk about it a lot more detail later on. In yellow, you've got P2006. This was originally an optional prescription to manage 2 and 3 zone rides. We've made specific funding available for that. There's now capital funding to create new rides, both 2 zone and 3 zone, and there's also revenue funding to manage those rides if they exist or once they're created as a top-up supplement. At the bottom, we've got in red the deer and squirrel management, and the reason they're in red is there are now separate funding streams for deer and squirrel control. We talked about them in December, as Penny mentioned at the beginning, so please have a look at that webinar if you'd like information about writing your plan. The reason they're in red as opposed to anything else is there are some niche circumstances where there is a prescription that can be turned on as part of the base action. So if somebody didn't have enough species control to warrant doing a plan and having the dedicated funding options, CWS3 and CWS1, there are ways of still being required to do some lighter touch species control as part of WD2. So we're not going to linger on the base action too much because we'd like to get into the supplements themselves, but it's important to note that in most instances you need this before you can enter the supplement, so it makes sense to spend a little bit of time talking about it. Payment rate is £127 a year. That's up from what it was before, which is nice. And there's also a minimum payment rate associated with the base option to allow people with smaller woodland areas to come in and still have a little bit more incentive to bring those minimal areas in. So £500 is the minimum. That works out at just under 4 hectares being the break-even point. But if you've got more than 4 hectares, you're going to be paid at the £127 per hectare per year anyway. So at a minimum, £500, but for larger pieces of woodland, it's £127 per hectare per year. As we've mentioned on that previous slide, the woodland management plan is a prerequisite for almost all of the things we're talking about here and should make narrative sense. And one of the other changes that is well worth talking about is, for those who remember WD2, the original option, it was a 5-year option. We've been able to make it 10 years to help with a bit of continuity of funding. And whereas the previous minimum area was 3 hectares, we will now be able to include areas of 0.5 hectares above in the scheme. And like I said earlier, this is really the foundational basic woodland management actions on which you can stack other things. So we're only expecting you to do some sort of quite standard woodland management actions that will pretty much apply to any woodland in the country. So an improvement of woodland condition through management of open space, temporary open space. If there are minimal levels of invasive plant species, for example, where you've got a small recently arrived infestation of something, for example, Himalayan balsam, you've found a few little bits of Himalayan balsam, and it's not enough to warrant a full-on species control plan for Himalayan balsam. There are prescriptions that would ask you to get that infestation under control. But please note, if the infestation of an invasive non-native species is substantial, there's a plans available and B, money to support those larger infestations and the removal of them. But certain things, if they're there, it would be great to get them under control. And then the last piece of this, as in terms of management activities, is increasing the level and volume of deadwood across the woodland area for invertebrate species, etc. I'll do these last 2 points in reverse order. So again, just to note that those monitoring reports that used to exist are no longer a thing. The giant spreadsheet that asked you to look at and record everything you were doing on an annual basis is no longer a requirement as it used to be. But instead, we're asking people to do a woodland condition assessment. This is against the 15 published indicators of woodland condition that are out there, and please do look at gov.uk for more details on how to do that. But we'd like this to be done as a baseline in year 1, and then as sort of a measure of success, if you like, in year 9. It's not really, there's no effect on you no matter what has happened, but it helps us with our targeting of information and well, it does help. Hopefully it will help you understand if you're moving your woodland in a direction that you'd like to towards being in favourable condition, but it also helps us understand that there is an effect of spending public money on trying to bring woodland into condition. Let's go on to the first of our supplements. So it's a bit of a mouthful, this one. Managed native woodland, including ancient and semi-natural woodland supplement. The reason for all those words is to highlight the fact that this is going to be a large proportion of the woodlands in England, a large proportion of the broadleaf woodlands in England, but it doesn't have to be ancient woodland. It can just be native or predominantly native woodland as well to come into here. Payment rate is £144 a hectare. Remember, this is on top of the base action that you already have. So on top of that CWD2 payment of £127 a hectare, this is an additional £144 a hectare. And like I said a moment ago, eligibility-wise, we're talking about predominantly native or near native species, but also ancient semi-natural woodlands. And very much the focus of this supplement is to improve the condition of those woodlands, with a particular sub-objective towards biodiversity. There are government targets towards bringing our nation's woodlands into favourable condition, and this will help us in that direction. And in terms of what we're asking you to do, there will be some management of successional scrub, management of any coppice that exists, but also a identification and mapping of veteran trees, potentially some interventions if that's deemed to be appropriate, to make sure those veteran trees are able to persist. There will be some selective thinning or regeneration felling to create the kind of conditions that are appropriate for any natural regeneration or restocking that you want to do to thrive. And if that is the case, there will be an expectation to make sure that restock is maintained in a way that it will go on to establish successfully. And this last point is just to recognise that there are other methods of making sure those conditions establish themselves, one of which could be grazing. In many situations that may not be appropriate, but there are some where selective grazing could be beneficial, and we have a new optional prescription to facilitate that. But it is very much at the discretion of woodland officers. It has to be deliberate and it has to be in conjunction with a grazing plan, but we may talk about that a little bit more in a second. So just to sort of sum up the purpose of this supplement and what it's for and what we need you to take away from this webinar. So this CWS supplement is very much to support the management of native and ancient semi-natural woodlands, and that is a support with the fact that there is a changing climate. There are threats on the horizon, and we'd like for all woodlands to be able to be more resilient to those threats. In terms of methods, there will be thinnings and fellings to enhance that diversity of the woodland, and any restocking should be done using native species that are appropriate for that area and for your site. There's a nod here to not just species diversity, but also genetic diversity, again, as a way of making woodland more resilient. As I mentioned just a few moments ago, cattle, there's options now out there, please read gov.uk, to allow cattle to help you manage vegetation in woodlands. But again, it's not a carte blanche to allow cattle in. It has to be very carefully considered and supported by a grazing plan. And the last piece here is that there is all sorts of capital funding. Please go and look at gov.uk for those capital items that will help you with the support of this, but quite notably the restoration of lapsed coppice and the creation of new rides. Capital funding is new on the docket. Going on to our Manage and Restoring PAWS supplement. This supplement has a payment rate of £275 a hectare, and that being higher recognises that there's a reasonable amount of work associated with this when it comes to changing the makeup of a canopy. So in terms of eligibility, we're expecting sites that are to be mapped as PAWS on that inventory that is maintained by Natural England. There are some situations where unmapped sites would be permissible, sites that aren't mapped as PAWS, but we would expect that to be at our woodland officer discretion. And if there's enough evidence to suggest that site is a PAWS site, but just hasn't been mapped for one reason or another, so it would have to have certain features, please talk to your woodland officer if you aren't sure of whether or not your your site would be appropriate. In terms of what we're hoping to get out of this supplement, or the use of this supplement, this is a shift in the proportion of canopy of the woodland that is made up from conifer or non-native broadleaf species. And if they are present, the protection or enhancement of existing ancient woodland features, whether this be ground flora or veteran trees or whatever it may be, we want to make sure that those things are able to persist and thrive. In terms of how it's done and what we're expecting people to do, many of the things that we talked about in CWS8, the ancient semi-natural woodland supplement, also would work here. So a lot of those things about managing successional scrub, etc., still apply, but over time we want a very deliberate shift in that canopy makeup to be part of the objective here. So reducing non-native species, which in many cases may be conifers but may not be, it may be non-native broadleafs. And we recognize that this is not necessarily going to happen all at once across the 10 years of your agreement. It may be part of a much longer plan, but we would very much be looking to see a marked effect here. So even if it's going to take 30 years, we aren't looking for someone who's taking just 1 or 2 trees out. We're looking for something that is a very deliberate shift in that canopy makeup towards a desired endpoint of a restored PAWS site. With that in mind, the kind of felling works that you're doing need to be with that in mind. It will need to make sense with your management plan and any felling licenses that have been generated as part of that and the objectives that are set at that time. And then when it comes to what you're restocking with, we're asking for you to be restocking with native broadleaves, trees that are going to go on to form that high canopy in the future. In terms of key messages, things to absolutely take away from about the PAWS supplement. So number one, if you're mapped as PAWS, we're expecting you to come into the PAWS supplement, provided there's actions for you to take, rather than the ancient semi-natural woodland or resilience option. If you're mapped as PAWS, PAWS should be your starting point. The PAWS supplement should be your starting point. The supplement itself is aiming to support that stand transition towards a more native woodland canopy. Like I said a moment ago, it doesn't need to be across the 10 years, but there does need to be a measurable marked effect in moving that needle. It's good to have had that conversation with your woodland officer while writing your management plan about how much you're trying to achieve over the time, what's your end point, what the final makeup may be. A lot of it's going to be site specific. And on that note, it's worth noting we're not trying to say remove all non-natives from the canopy. That's not necessary. It is permissible to include a portion of non-native or honorary natives, but we are looking for a shift to something that is going to be predominantly of native makeup in a deliberate way over time. Okay, so going on to the wood and resilience supplement, as I said, this has caused quite a lot of perhaps, I don't want to say confusion's a bit strong, but there's been a little bit of misinterpretation by the fact that resilience is used in this supplement's name. In reality, we would like woodlands to be made more resilient in most cases rather than specifically to do with this supplement. However, this supplement is designed to help stands that have been traditionally perhaps monoculture or near monoculture stands, either and possibly are of even aged, even species, and possibly fairly uniform structure as well. So very little diversity in the canopy structure. So number one, just to hammer home the eligibility. This supplement is not eligible. If you're eligible for either of the other two, you're not eligible for this one. This is the niche end. This is for, like I said, those even-aged, even-structured stands that can't come into PAWS and can't come into the ancient semi-natural woodland options. And this supplement primarily is to help with the shift in silvicultural approach towards a restructuring, increasing that age and species diversity, but also structural diversity of the canopy. That's important too. And where the resilience part comes in the context of this supplement is the downstream benefits of doing that. Resilience, improved resilience to external stresses, wind, drought, pest disease, all the things that we know are going to continue coming thicker and faster with a changing climate. So how will this be done? It's the speaker after me will go into a little bit of a bit more detail of some of the things you can think about while framing the conversation with your woodland officer if the stands that you have are appropriate for this supplement. But it's very key to have an agreed approach that's a deliberate approach that is aiming to shift towards a low impact management strategy, such as continuous cover forestry, for example. And very much the aim needs to be there, deliberate aim to increase species and structural diversity of the canopy in a sustainable way. And any works that you're doing to get there, any thinning or regen felling that you're doing, needs to be set in that context of creating conditions for a suitable restock that will get you to that that more diverse and better structured stand of trees over time. So absolute key messages and myth busting stuff here. If you're eligible for PAWS or the native and ancient semi-natural woodland supplement, this supplement's not for you. Go into those other things. This is for encouraging, they don't have to be commercial stands, but this is for things that have been traditionally monoculture or near monoculture stands of even age, even species, and poor structural diversity, to shift them towards something that is a different set of silvicultural practices that will lead to a more resilient stand over time. It kind of recognizes that any shift in silvicultural practice will carry some cost, and particularly for these the stands that we're intending this to be used for, there's a little bit of friction at the beginning, even though the downstream benefits are certainly there in terms of all the production and stresses that we've talked about. Yes, so just to sum that up, the desired outcome is making those even age stands, even species stands, if species is a word, I'm not sure, moving towards that endpoint, that deliberate endpoint. So I'm now going to pass over to John Burgess, who's far more equipped to talk about resilience than I am, to introduce a tool that's been around for quite some time, but put it in the context of higher tier and how it can be used for you to help frame some of the thinking around moving into the supplement. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Richard, for giving us the context for it. So I'm probably going to repeat an amount of the information that you've just heard, but hopefully what I'm going to convey is a suggested method of how you can frame your application for the resilience supplement that allows us to mark your homework, and that we can, through that application process, have that conversation and dialogue with you, that we build up a really good quality application that sets the wood into an ever increasing resilience against the threats of climate change. So we're going to suggest that you use the Resilience Implementation Framework. Now, this is a tool developed by Forest Research. If you type that term in to a search engine, go to the Climate Change Hub, you'll find it sat there with a huge amount of scientific literature, the evidence behind the approach that we're suggesting you take, and all the tools, freely available software packages that help support the information and knowledge that you should be putting into your woodland management plan and supporting your application for the supplement. And I'm also going to reference the Forestry Commission Woodland Management Plan template, because we're aware that's what most people use. In essence, what we're asking for is the section that's already in the template, listed and found at 5.10, this little box, which most of you hopefully will have seen, and expanding it. we're asking for the same bits of information, the threat and your response, but we want more information to help us understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and the benefits of doing it, how that will enhance the resilience. Increasing structure and species diversity, very simple term, most people have an idea, but when we apply it to a forest on a large scale, it becomes increasingly complex. There's more and more questions that get asked that we need to be answered. So by using the resilience implementation framework, which I'm going to run you through over the next few slides, hopefully you'll have a clear idea how you can format your application and evidence for that supplement. So I'm going to start by saying what's in that box really needs to be expanded. It needs to be seen throughout your whole woodland management plan. This isn't just a little tick box exercise. We need to really see that the resilience runs through your whole application. But the detail that we're going to ask for needs to be sufficient for the scale and complexity of your woodland. So a small, fairly simple woodland that's on the same soil type, no fundamental difference across it from one end to the other, will be a fairly simple application. A huge estate that changes from the top of a hill to the bottom of a valley, different soil types, different mixtures of species, will require a more complex application, and I hope you can understand why. We ask you to follow the resilience framework. That's a 5-step process. And each of the next 5 slides, we'll just go into it in a little bit more detail, but together it forms a golden thread that from the outset to the end point is really clear what you're intending, how your woodland will change, not just within this woodland management plan, but in future ones. It's a direction of travel. So I'll go through each of those steps now. The first one is to define what your woodland is doing. Now, the core concept of resilience is about delivering the woodland outputs after some disturbance event. So a large storm, how quickly will your woodland be able to respond and deliver the things that you wanted it to? Again, the more quickly it does that, the more resilient the woodland is. So what's your woodland for? The two main things we ever get are biodiversity and timber. Hopefully both together on the same footprint of land. But when we're talking about biodiversity, biodiversity isn't a single thing. There's a picture of a purple emperor here. Will the purple emperor's food plants be available after the storm, the fire, the drought? How quickly will those plants regenerate and regrow so that that population of that particular species can be supported? Or maybe timber. How much timber volume do you need to be financially secure in your woodland? How quickly is that timber growing? As climate changes, as drought, maybe your species will start to grow more slowly. So it's understanding really quite niche. What is your woodland doing? What is it there for? And it may just be something other than recreational green space or just a beautiful place that gives you some, a sense of well-being. How quickly can it restore those things? What's it doing? Then you identify the threats. What is it that is being increased and enhanced in frequency and likelihood by climate change that's going to impact your wood? There are a few big, fairly generic threats, but if you're on the top of a hill or the bottom of a valley, wind is going to impact you differently. So you've got to list that threat and list how you are identifying that that is a particular threat to your woodland. Now, there are some tools out there. So here is a little snapshot, hopefully people will recognize it, of the ecological site classification tool. Now, it's far too small. There are webinars about how to use this, but this is a tool that records for you the windiness score. It responds to the species matched to the site, tells you whether your species mix composition is suitable today, and it gives you future climate projections. So there are tools like ESC out there that help you understand whether your species will be fit for the future. But we really need it tailored to a site. We have seen some woodland management plans that pick up the threat presented by Ips typographus, the spruce bark beetle. We read through the management plan, there's no spruce in the woodland. It's a sort of a cut and pasted threat that's not applicable to the woodland. We really don't want to see that. That's just wasting your time and it's wasting ours. So make sure the threats are appropriate to the woodland. But then prioritize those threats. In any large woodland, you're going to have, unfortunately, quite a long list of potential threats. But look at that very simple little graph. Is it going to be a high impact? Are you going to lose the whole woodland? And how likely is it? So I've given some examples for each of that color of the red, the amber, and the green. A red could be a stressed monoculture of Norway spruce that's growing in the Ips zone. We know you could lose the whole woodland almost overnight, and it would be devastating. And if you're in the Ips zone, it's fairly likely. So we would want to see immediate action addressed clearly and strongly within the woodland management plan. The amber zone, a little bit more relaxed. So an example I've given here, diseased Corsican pine. So a Dothystroma infected stand. The trees are still alive, they're still growing, but the volume increment has dramatically reduced from what it used to be, what it was when you planted it, when you intended it for it to be. So how are you going to change that? Well, you could underplant it. That increases the productivity of the whole site, looks to increase the timber income over time. So it's a longer, more relaxed, more gentle action, but it's definite action that you're taking. And then the green, well, that's low risk or low likelihood, low impact. Just every time you intervene in the wood, just ask yourself, am I increasing the species and structural diversity? Is there some little action I can take now that will help? But it's, over the course of the next few woodland management plans. So you prioritize those threats and see which are the most severe and respond more robustly. Then the next step is coming down to those definite actions. Now, there's a great guide published by Forest Research. There's a link at the bottom of my slide, and we'll put that available, circulate the information afterwards. Within that chart, within that publication, there's this chart. It lists the main risks of climate change along the top and the actions that you can take down the side. Now, I will just point out that this supplement pays for increased species diversity and increased structural diversity, which are the two that I've highlighted in the red bars. Now, they are the most powerful responses that we can make within a stand to enhance resilience. But you can work in some of those other benefits, actions along with the two that are being supported. So choosing tree provenance, well, when you're choosing to increase your tree species diversity, if you're bringing in planted material, well, consider the tree provenance of that planted material being paid for the increased tree species diversity. So then you choose those actions being responding to the threats that you're seeing on your site. And then monitoring. That's some of this slightly silviculture that might be slightly unfamiliar to people. Well, the changes that you're making, how do they affect? Do they work? Do they bring the desired responses? Are there some unforeseen benefits that are occurring within the woodland that by monitoring you can really start to pick up? And an example of the sort of monitoring that we want to see outlined in the woodland management plan should be linked to the objectives you're trying to achieve. So the example here, if you're looking to use natural regeneration, we'd expect some deer impact assessments. We'd expect you to be looking at the species mix of the natural regeneration to show that it's not just turning into another monoculture. And just a little note here that CWD2 does require the woodland condition assessment to be used, but it's a brilliant tool for looking at the biodiversity and the ecological function of the wood, but it doesn't give you all the detail you'll probably need to look at some of those changes that will be monitored through the resilience supplement. So just a little caveat there. Now, you've got a woodland management plan, and I've set out how we will look to for that golden thread of the resilience building up through. If all of that's in your woodland management plan, that's brilliant. Submit the application, we'll process it, and yeah, everything's covered. However, we're expecting most woodland management plans to fall somewhere in the next 2 bullet points. That the information's there, but it's not clearly linked as a golden thread. So what we might ask you to do is just cut and paste some of that information and just really demonstrate to us that the actions are linked to the threats. The threats are linked to your woodland outputs, and it is all consistent. So just a fairly simple little bit of sort of cut and pasting, or I think probably most likely we'll just ask for a little bit more detail. We haven't originally asked for that much detail. 5.10, you remember, is just a small little box. We just want you to expand on that. Now, we're calling each of those a resilience plan, just as a name to give to this document that will probably get appended to a woodland management plan. We're not asking you to change, to reopen, redraft the woodland management plan. It's just provide a little bit of extra evidence in support of the application for this supplement. If, however, you're at that final bullet point, that your woodland management plan, it's just incompatible with the aims of the supplement, well, yeah, we might just need to have a fairly strong conversation that, yeah, and whether your site, your application is suitable for this particular supplement. Remembering that if you don't take this, then maybe you are still suitable for just the base action, the CWD2. Now we're going to publish very soon after this webinar an ops note to put all of that I've just been talking through in a bit more detail, and we're going to put out this sample template. This is how I suggest we would like to see the information coming across. It's not going to be a huge document of page after page after page. So just a simple spreadsheet that really picks up that golden thread running through. What's the threat? How you've assessed it. So in this example, the top line, I've used wind as a threat. You've got a very high DAMS score. DAMS is the detailed aspect modeling system, a way of measuring the windiness of a site. And you're also noticing some wind thrown in adjacent stand. Fantastic. You've evidenced that wind is a threat. What are you currently doing? You're thinning, you're taking out some trees, leaving a wind firm edge. We'd expect to see that sort of action covered under the base WD2. So then we ask what you're doing in addition. So in just this example here, first and second thinning, looking at removing trees from the matrix to develop better stem development on the retained trees that increase wind firmness, a more complex pattern of marking rather than just systematic row thinning. So things that do take more time, more effort, more skill, absolutely. But that's what we're paying you for, to deliver these stands that should be more wind firm. And then just lay out the sort of the monitoring of the time scales as you would normally in a woodland management plan. So that's the sort of the level of detail we're looking for, but we'll again be looking for that golden thread throughout the management plan. And if it's not there, then we'll just ask you to sketch something out using this potentially as the template. So that's the end of my little slot. So I don't know who's taking over now to run the Q&A.
That would be me. Thank you very much, John. Thanks, Rich, as well. So thanks, everyone, for putting your questions in the Q&A, those that can. We're keeping an eye on the chat as well, because I know that there's a few technical problems with that. And thanks to those people who are using the upvote. We'll get through as many questions as we can, and upvoting the most popular questions really helps us to do that. So I will dive straight in from this question with this question from Kevin, who's asked that given we already have many approved woodland management plans that were written before the new supplements, will the Forestry Commission accept a supplementary note on how these supplements will be applied rather than have to do a complete rewrite of the plan? Rich, is that one for you?
It can be. So then there are a few things that will determine the answer to that question. So unfortunately, it's not a simple yes, no. A little bit will depend on what licensing you've already had approved and whether or not what you're proposing to do differently matches with that licensing. As we know, it's not always possible to change licenses once they've been enacted. So a lot of it will very much depend on whether or not what you're setting out the ambition to do is in line with the sort of broad principles and objectives that made sense in your plan, the original plan, in the context of what licenses you have, and then in terms of the site as well. So unfortunately, it's a bit of a non-answer, but it will depend very much on the situation. So chat your woodland officer. If it's the right thing to do, I'm sure, and it's possible, they will work with you to make it so. But I don't want to promise that it'll always be possible, because there are constraints. But I'm open to anybody else adding anything to that if they want to.
I think you covered it fine, Rich.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, both. So the next one here is referring back to when you were talking about near native species, Rich. And Gary's asked if that's naturalized species or is there a reference list?
So it's a good question. I'm not sure who'd be the best to answer this. I mean, the UCO list is probably a good start as to how the classifications are applied. And like I said, you are allowed a portion of naturalized and non-natives in a lot of circumstances. But I don't know if anybody on the panel wants to say anything else about how to select and how to determine the classification of species.
I think I should probably just offer a few words. I mean, the native species we're fairly clear about. There is a huge number of terms, naturalized, near native, just to name two, that I think those are relatively well known. They're the sycamores, they're the sweet chestnuts, and then everything else would sort of fall more into the non-native. Again, so yeah, I think just speak to the woodland officer would be the first point of call, I would say. But
okay, thank you both.
I was just wondering, Neil, do you want to add anything to that one?
Yeah, if we've got time. So yes, the current sort of reference guide is the Managing Ancient and Native Woodland Practice Guide that's still there since its publication in 2010. But just to point out, it's being reviewed and refreshed, and we're hoping to publish that guide, taking into account what's happened in the last 15 years or so. And part of that, and John is involved in that process, is actually looking at the various terms that we use and trying to move to perhaps thinking about appropriate species rather than the plethora of academic and various terms that we're using, because it is very confusing. So we're hoping the new guidance will actually make it easier for practitioners to consider which species to use in different situations and different types of woodlands.
Okay, thank you. So that's everything on that one. So similarly, Andrew's asked if there's any guidance on what proportion of non-native or near-native species are allowed within native woodland qualifying for CWS 8, and whether they can follow the same approach in restocking, or does any non-native element in restocking rule out the CWS 8 payment?
So it's follow, as the previous response, follow the current good practice guidance, which as I say, we're hoping to republish in the spring, early summer. It's not likely to change too much from the current guidance, which many of our practitioners are familiar with. And if you have your discussion with your woodland officer for your specific circumstances, we can accommodate your hopefully your objectives for that site.
Great, thanks, Neil. Next question here from Graham.
Oh, Lucy, sorry, can I just jump in?
Yeah,
I think there was a second half of that question about, if I'm reading the right one, about following the same approach in restocking. Might be worth just touching on that. I mean, I'm not the PAWS restoration expert, but I can offer a thought, unless Richard wants to jump straight in on that.
Go ahead, John.
No, okay. So we're looking at, PAWS restoration is a process over time to take the Managing Ancient Native Woodland guide. We would look at the features of interest that are currently existing within that woodland. If they are best protected by clear felling, okay, we'll accept that, and then we'll look at the native, the species that restocked, and if the native proportion increases significantly, then yeah, you know, we're in the right place. However, I think we all realise now that clear felling is probably not the best way to protect the features of interest in a PAWS woodland, which are likely to be these ground flora that live in some kind of shade. So I think it is I'd just say I understand the question. I see where you're going. I just think that maybe we look at sort of the supplement that really does talk about that sort of more gradual pace of restoration that is supported by sort of the UKFS practice guides.
Great, thanks both. The next question here from Graham is, if ancient mapped woodland data is evidentially inaccurate, will the woodland officer have discretion to agree the appropriate supplement?
So I can jump in on that. Yes, the answer is yes. They will. So if you have concerns or suspicions that your site is, or knowledge, it doesn't have to be just a suspicion, that your site is inaccurately mapped, talk to the woodland officer and we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks, Rich. So our next question here from Jack. I think this is somebody who's asking about the why all this information wasn't published at the same time as the applications. Applications are now being processed with contradictory advice. So this is about the guidance coming out now, whereas I guess people have already had applications in play.
Penny, would you like to say something about the phasing of things?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously there was some guidance, and we've been working to produce more guidance, and there's another question in the chat about training for woodland officers. We have been talking to woodland officers about this, and we've rolled out training to them over the last few months as well. Obviously we've been going for a pre-app process. We've only just started inviting people into the system to actually apply for higher tier. So appreciate it would have been useful for you to have more detailed information sooner. But we've been working on this as we've been kind of rolling out the pre-application process as well. So, and we're at the start, obviously, of inviting people actually to apply on system as well. So but we are doing, I think, a further session, I think, John, aren't we, next week internally with staff to talk about the resilience one specifically as well, which is where a lot more of the questions have come up. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything else.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Penny. Somebody here has asked whether the requirement for monitoring reports in years 1, 5 and 9 of CWD2 have now gone.
So there's as I mentioned, there's a requirement to do your condition assessment, but the old giant Excel-based monitoring report is no longer a requirement. We had reports from many people who were using it that were having difficulties, and lots of people were saying it was not too much use to them either. It was just a flat burden. So we've worked to do away with it. I think that's. I hope I'm answering the question correctly there.
Thank you, Rich. Nicola here is saying that they've already removed conifer from a PAWS site, and there is some conifer regeneration. Can they apply for CWS2 to help control this?
It's going to be site specific. So definitely talk to your woodland officer and explain your circumstance. But the reality is, if that conifer regeneration is at risk of taking hold, and John, by all means, jump in on this as well, I would imagine that there's probably enough work for you to do to justify the supplement. But it's very difficult without being able to take note of those site specifics. So the Woodland Officer is probably your best port of call. But does my thinking align with yours, John?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it's just a few wisps of regen, I think it would probably be the native woodland supplement, because yeah, that would feel like it justifies that amount of work. Whereas if it is a full carpet of regen and there's very little else, and without intervention it's going to revert back to a full conifer canopy, then yeah, I would say that the work of PAWS restoration is not yet complete, and therefore the PAWS would be the most reasonable supplement. But as Richard said, site by site basis. Speak to your Woodland Officer.
Lovely, thanks, John. The next question here, I just refresh. So Kevin is saying the supplement looks very attractive for large conifer woodlands that can be managed under CCF. Can the whole woodland or forest that will receive a management intervention in the 10-year agreement be included?
I'm afraid it's probably going to be another site by site question, where the answer is please talk to your Woodland Officer, because without the particulars it's really hard to be able to say. But I don't know if there's anybody else that gained more from that question than I'm able to with my
yeah
knowledge.
I think I can offer a thought. So the guidance that will be published very shortly on gov.uk, we've just had to boil it down to 15 minutes presentation. It talks about that silvicultural transformation not being achievable within a 10-year management plan. But the management plan should absolutely set out the long-term aims that are 20, 30, 50 years in the making. As long as all the actions that are taken within this 10-year management plan clearly align with that direction of travel, then yeah, because you are committing to that journey, and it will be 3, 4, 10-year management plan cycles before the woodland looks as a that end point painting that you'll draw. So I would say, yeah, absolutely. Any actions within a 10-year cycle, we'd probably expect to see a commitment to 2 thinnings, and those thinnings should really start to identify the seed trees and look at creating that sort of management access. So if you're including that level of detail into those management actions and interventions over that 10-year cycle, I'd say, yeah, it seems pretty much aligned to exactly the aims of the plan.
Lovely. Thanks, John. Thanks, Rich. So the next one here from Edward. Are there any circumstances where CWS5 can be applied on PAWS sites which are already in the early stages of continuous cover forestry using some non-native tree species?
I think you're having the same thoughts I am. It's site specific. I think that's going to be just the recording every answer for every question that comes. Yeah, it's all about the sort of proportions. If you have 10% of native trees, then but otherwise it's you're moving into a CCF system that includes a little bit of birch, a little bit of sycamore. Yeah, probably CSW5, the resilient supplement, is the right one. If you're but if it's on a PAWS site, no, of course you can't. If it's a PAWS site, you're only eligible for the PAWS supplement.
And I suppose, again, just to add to that, the resilient supplement, the reason we wouldn't want that to be used, obviously the eligibility says no anyway, but if there is PAWS, we are looking for that restoration, for that shift of canopy back towards a more native canopy over time. And there's sort of hints towards it in the resilience, but it's not as overt. And just because it would be managing, we wouldn't necessarily want just that PAWS site to be managed as a different silvicultural system. We do want it shifting back towards a native canopy. That's the crux of that option.
Yeah, sorry, I only saw the PAWS site in the once I reflected back on the question. So if take the PAWS site out of that, then yeah, the answer is it might have some native species run as a CCF regime, but it depends. But if it's PAWS, it's just the PAWS supplement.
Okay, thank you both. So the next question here from Matthew is, how does one calculate if CWS5 is a large enough area to qualify for example, and subcompartment may be an even age monocrop, but a small part of a larger, more diverse woodland.
I'm thinking out loud here, so don't take anything as gospel, but I imagine it becomes a self-sorting exercise where there'll be a threshold which it's not worth it to you to do the administrative work to bring it in, and there's no sort of system change for either. It would just be you'd be down to just a few trees if it gets too small, which doesn't match the objectives of the option. So I would say where it's appropriate to use it, it will become obvious because you can do the work that makes sense with the objectives of the option. There's no technical minimum threshold that we're allowing other than the total scheme eligibility of 0.5 hectares. Unless anybody's thinking differently, I believe that would be how I'd be thinking about it.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here again about, so it appears that the Forestry Commission have not yet recognised that necessity for non-natives in order to cope with predicted climate change, which near natives will be accepted.
Oh, I'll jump on that one if I may. I think absolutely we have recognised that. It's worth just pointing out that we've separated out these three. So PAWS should be restored. It's ancient woodland. It's the jewels in our ecological crown. Native woodlands we want to retain as native. Everything else can take the resilience supplement, and what we are asking to see is more species diversity. There's nothing, I haven't used the word native in that last sentence. We would like to see people diversify their stands to include more trees. Now that could be bringing in some Western red cedar into a Sitka spruce stand. That's the sort of thing that we're looking for as part of this resilience supplement. If you wish to include some native species to put some birch as a soil improver, fantastic. That's a great silvicultural decision. But we are supporting non-natives using more complex silvicultural systems with the resilience supplement. So sorry if that sort of sounded as quite a strong rebuff, but I think I'm quite proud of the resilience supplement and what we can support quite generously with it.
Definitely.
And some good species of oak listed there. Yeah, I'd like those. You know, the right tree in the right place where it's not going to cause any harm and where we use it to the best of its advantages. Absolutely.
Lovely, thanks, John. Next one here. What is the purpose for the current obsession of revising woodland management plans that have already been approved, sometimes 2 to 3 years ago, prior to applying? Woodland management plans are not legally binding, but CS agreements are, and presumably specifications and quantitative outputs will be detailed in these agreements. I can understand new woodland management plans being assessed according to the current CS requirements, but is it not just a waste of our time and FC officers to revisiting already approved woodland management plans?
So thank you for the question. So it's not so much about as we know, the woodland management plans aren't just a grant tool. They're their own thing. They're to set your ambition and your objectives in your woodland. I think the reason we're interested in looking at them is many were written at a time when people may have been limiting their objectives based on the funding that was available at the time. So that things may have shifted. However, it's kind of reasonable to look at a plan and think, well, hopefully your objectives haven't shifted so much in just because of a change in funding. And ideally, particularly when felling licenses are involved and have been approved, things still need to make sense in the same narrative context. So that's the reason. It's just to make sure that money isn't just making people flip-flop ambition. But I don't know if anybody wants to add anything or take anything away from that.
I mean, I'll just say, I mean, others might we don't want to revise woodland management plans unless we need to, as long as the objectives still fit and the felling proposals still fit with what you want to do. So I think it's just making sure that the objectives do fit with what you want to do. So we are definitely not looking for more work. We're just wanting to make sure they do support what you want to do.
Great, thank you.
I'll maybe just throw in in my speech, if this is a reaction to sort of asking for that resilience plan, it was just where the woodland management plan is fine, but it just doesn't give us quite enough detail to assess an application for for the public money that will be used to support it. So it's asking for additional information rather than revising the woodland management plan. And I'm quite comfortable asking for that. Where with the original woodland management plan didn't give enough detail.
Thank you. The next question is, how is lapsed coppice defined to qualify for FY6 grant?
That is a very good question, and it's one of those things that probably will be a lot easier to solve on site than with a blanket statement. But I don't know, John or Neil, do you have any sort of rough I don't know, rough guidelines that can be used for thinking about when something is lapsed coppice and when it is not?
Your condition assessment's probably going to identify that as a thing that could improve the condition. It would probably tick a number of the indicators boxes in terms of structure, vertical structure, etc. So it'd be something as part of doing that condition assessment that would be in the mix in the discussion with your woodland officer to come up with a work plan for that woodland. So I'm not familiar with the FY6, I'm afraid, but I'm just using common sense. If it's lapsed coppice and you want to do some coppicing which will improve the condition of your wood, then it makes perfect sense that you would want to do that, and it'd be supported by the supplement.
Okay, thank you. Next one here is from Kevin. How is this CWS 8 supplement being applied to a field parcel that's part ASNW and part conifer, non-native and PAWS? Assume it's applied proportionately to the relevant areas. I and FP can have both CWS1 and CWS2 supplements plus WD2 over the whole area.
Yes, Rhiannon, you might want to say something about this system-wise, but my understanding is that from a system perspective, the system is looking for things to sum up to a maximum of the total parcel area. So in that case, supplement A and supplement B, as long as they add up to the parcel area or less, that should be permissible as long as they're not trying to overlap, as long as they're side by side. Is that?
That's absolutely right, Rich. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Faith. Katie's asking if the woodland owner only wants to go for the base WD2 payment, how many elements from the supplements, for example, deer, squirrel, thinning, etc., will be enforced?
So if you just want to go for the unless there is some reason for a woodland officer to be uncomfortable with you not doing additional things, that's completely fine to just take the base. You don't have to apply for any of the supplements. They are exactly what they say on the tin. They are supplements. So as long as you do the prescriptions in the base action and you're able to do those, there may be some cases where, let's say that wood is being hammered by deer and squirrel, and the woodland officer doesn't think you can achieve the objectives of the wood, or even worse, that without some sort of level of control, that wood will be unable to be in a sustainable state, shall we say. Then they may ask you to heavily consider doing those species management actions. The same might be true if there's invasive non-native plants there. If there's Japanese knotweed, for example, they're probably going to be pretty keen on you taking note of getting rid of it. But in most situations, provided not doing other things doesn't put your woodland at risk, doing just the base action is completely fine. But talk to your woodland officer And one of the reasons we've worked hard to split things out into chunks that can be paid for individually is to recognize that not everybody wants to or can or is resourced to do all of these things as a big suite. Sometimes it has to be done in semi piecemeal. So the base action's there for that.
Okay, thank you. So the next one here is whether there's a minimum age of native woodland to qualify for CWS 8. I see Miles has provided a response there, who's saying 15 years old is the minimum age for CWD2. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, Rich?
I don't think so. That's just to meet the definition of woodland. But bear in mind that I don't think this has changed, but gov.uk should be able to help you, and indeed conversations with woodland officers. You've always been able to include in your management plan a proportion of young woodland as well, and although that may not be so that from the management plan perspective, you might be able to include things that are younger than 15 years old. But yes, in terms of our eligibility, we're using the same definition we've been using for a while, which is trees that are at least 15 years old and are going to have at least 20% canopy cover.
Okay, thank you. The next question here from Andrew: do you recognise that restoring PAWS is likely to decrease resilience in most cases by significantly reducing the number of permitted species, especially those that are suited to CCF? If we have a PAWS site, why can't we have the resilience payment if we don't want to restore it to native species?
I'll start, but then I suspect perhaps Neil and John have things to say. It really is that we have an ambition to make sure that PAWS sites are restored. That's why that's at the nexus of why we've put it in a hierarchy. I'm not saying that it's impossible to treat a PAWS site in a way that won't restore it, but in terms of what we're using the public purse for, the ambition is to favour restoration rather than status quo. But I don't know, Neil or John, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, the long-term aim for PAWS is gradual restoration, and I stress the word gradual and not abrupt restoration. That's been a commitment for a long time, and if we're paying public money on those areas, then obviously if that's the objective, then that's fine. But if it's not the objective, then it's hard to justify that public money. Rich has already said that the base option is available. So as long as you're doing those things in the base option, that's not to say that you can't have the base option on those areas. But the PAWS supplement is what it says on the tin. It's about restoring that area in the long term back to native species. It's not preventing you from managing the woodland if you want to continue managing it that way, we're not preventing you from doing that. It's just that the incentive is about the restoration of that site.
And I'll jump in with a more philosophical point about resilience. Resilience is to deliver the woodland outcomes through climate change. Now, in a ancient woodland, in a PAWS site, the primary objective should be that wholesale ecological system. Now, it might be that if it has non-native species, it's more tolerant of burning down, let's say, just to pick a threat at random. But is that timber supply that it will keep doing in the longer term, is that the concept that we wish to be resilient? Well, on an ancient woodland, really, it should be the ecological functioning trumps everything else. So resilience isn't just a single thing. And that's a more philosophical point, but just to pick up on what my colleagues have said there.
Okay. Next question is pre-commercial thinning, for example, of larch or CP to try and adjust for disease issues. Is this eligible for resilience supplement?
I would think so, yeah. Just, like I say, site-specific, but it does sound like you are diversifying species. So you're underplanting the larch with something else, you're increasing structural diversity, and you're doing it in response to a clear and present threat. So that seems to tick all of the boxes that I set out in that golden thread, but on a site-by-site basis. But sounds like you're in the right frame of mind for that supplement.
Okay, next one here. CWS8, over what area does the supplement apply? For example, a 10-hectare land parcel entirely ASNW with only 1 hectare of coppicing or thinning scheduled over the next 10 years. Does the supplement apply to the whole land parcel or only 1 hectare, or is it to be discussed with the woodland officer? Woodlands made of 1 large land parcel or many small land parcels could be disadvantaged depending on how it's calculated.
There shouldn't be instances where you're disadvantaged just because you haven't had your land parcel broken up. If there's enough work to justify the action on the area that you're wanting to apply it to, then it should be able to be applied across that area. So in your example, when you've only got a hectare of coppice, whether or not that's included as part of the ancient semi-natural woodland thing will depend very much site by site, but you're not going to be if you're not just, let's say you have an ancient semi-natural woodland that doesn't have any coppice actions, you're not going to be precluded from doing it just because there is a prescription there to help you do those things if they're appropriate. It's about, is there enough appropriate action as worked up with your woodland officer to justify the supplement? And in your situation, irrespective of whether it's a single parcel or not, if it's ancient semi-natural woodland, there's probably going to be enough work across that holding to justify it. But it really depends on the site, and a woodland officer will be able to advise you in a much more nuanced and detailed way.
Okay, thank you. Actually, we've only got about 12 minutes left, so I think we'll try for maybe 2 or 3 questions. We're going to put a feed, so apologies if we can't get to all the questions today. We're going to put a feedback form in the chat, so if anyone can please use that, to find out, if we can do this better in future, and also to get your feedback on this particular webinar, but also are there any other topics that people are particularly interested in hearing more about? So obviously we did the writing species management plan for grey squirrels and deer back in December. I've popped the link to the recording of that in the chat. There's other topics that people need to know more about, would like to know more about, then please do use that form to let us know. And I'll crack on maybe with the last 2 or 3. So Jackie's asked, what about the RPA Year 3 and Year 5 reports?
They were on the old Rich, so they were the old monitoring reports, Year 3 and 5, which have now changed.
Yeah, sorry. So that's the spreadsheet that I was talking about having been done away with. So no. But please do, for evidence that you have to complete and retain, please look at gov.uk. Everything that's on the pages should be the things that you need to A, do, but B, also keep for your records in case we ask you for them.
Thank you. Hugh has asked if we could clarify, if a woodland owner doesn't wish to reduce the conifer percentage in PAWS woodland, can they just claim WD2 on that area?
The answer is yes. You're not obliged to go into the supplements, but like Neil said, they're there to provide that extra sweetener to do the things that we're hoping to achieve.
Lovely, thank you. I see Miles has come back on that with the same answer as well. We've got Matthew, do the veteran tree payments have to be off-ground tree surgery actions? Can they include halo thinning, etc.?
So please look at gov.uk around veteran trees. There's a whole load of new capital to help people with specific interventions. When it comes to things that are within the supplement, it's much more about making sure you've identified present and potential future veterans and have looked at any threats that are existing to those trees. It's not necessarily about doing the work. There's extra advice in the form of, like, for example, we can fund you to do a PA1 and to go away and have an ancient tree plan done. If you need to do some very specific interventions that have risk associated with them, we know ancient trees can be quite sensitive to interventions, so please do your due diligence. But there is capital funding to help you make those decisions out there now. So please look at gov.uk. But John or Neil, I don't know if you want to add anything else about veteran trees.
Yeah, I'll jump on that one. I think to look at the question directly, do the payments have to be off ground? It's almost the opposite. If you are doing something that is off the ground, so actual pruning on the trees, this is not the supplement for you. There is a bespoke one for any works that prolong the life of the tree. Forgive me if I get the code wrong. I think it's TE17, which is, Rianne's nodding, that's great. So that is the one, and it's a very generous per tree payment. This is really more just about mapping, recording the tree on the ancient tree inventory, and doing some very light shade reduction. In a woodland, shade is probably the biggest threat to the veteran trees. So it is just about that very gentle removal of shade, direct canopy interference with the veteran trees, protecting them. But if you're doing work on the trees, really, yeah, get the veteran tree management plan, get someone who's really qualified in those very, very unique special trees, and then take the TE17.
So this next one, I can see there's some comments come back to it. So this is whether the original Natural England ASNW register only recorded woodland over 2 hectares, and what do we use for small woods? And we've got a couple of responses here. So Susan says that she believes Natural England have reviewed ancient woodland inventory to include smaller blocks of woodland.
It's an ongoing process to do that. But again, as we said with the PAWS supplement, the same is true for the ancient semi-natural wood. Remember, it is native and ancient semi-natural woodland. So if it's predominantly native broadleaf, it's already permissible to use that supplement. But even if you've got suspicions that it is ancient woodland, have that conversation with the woodland officer, and you can either use that. They can either use their discretion if there's certain ground flora present, for example, ancient woodland indicator species. They'll be able to provide advice with that in mind, but also there are various ways that if you're really interested in getting it added to the inventory, you can go through various steps to make sure that happens. But provided it's at least native broadleaf, predominantly native broadleaf, it doesn't have to be ancient to be eligible for that supplement. You can come in anyway.
Thank you. I see Jonathan's very helpfully added the that revised ancient woodland inventory from Natural England, the link to that there in that comment. Right, probably manage one or two more. So is WS5 compatible with the Woodland Tree Health Grant?
Thanks, Lucy.
Rianne.
Yeah. So Woodland Tree Health and Higher Tier are compatible with each other. So as long as the CWS5 isn't being used for something that should be applied for under the Tree Health Grant, then it can be used on top of one another, as long as they're not paying for the same thing, which they shouldn't be. We just need to make sure that you're looking at the compatibility on gov.uk just to make sure that it's relevant for what you want to do. Rich, did you want to come in?
Only to say that for it will be slightly site specific. Rianne's right. Technically, those two things are compatible. But if you've got a situation where in the tree health grant you're clear felling and restocking quite a large area, it's very difficult to transition a clear fell into CCF at the same time. So there may be things where they do clash, but as long as they don't interfere with the things you're trying to carry out, if they're core objectives, there's no reason why the tree health grant can't be used to on top of those areas.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Beth. So I think we can manage one more. I think so. Jackie's asked, how is this the information for CWS5 collated for the application, as much of what is being discussed is for the woodland management plan? many of which have been written over the last 2 years, waiting for this opportunity.
So yeah, I think that question probably has been slightly answered, is that the woodland management plan is what it is, and if it's been approved, it's locked in. If the detail in the woodland management plan doesn't quite now meet the supplement, but it is still aligned, and we just ask for a little bit more detail, have a look at the template. It's not going to be hugely onerous. It's just to display that golden thread running through the actions meet the threats that deliver continued woodland outputs over time. So it might just be, and I apologize that the things aren't quite in the right sequence, but hey, we've got a grant out there that's open for people to apply to now, so that's the thing to celebrate. But we might just ask for a little bit more information for CWS5. That should be hopefully fairly easy for the quality applicants to come in and pull together and show us your thinking.
Thank you, John. And I realise we're just about out of time, but let's squeeze one more in, shall we? So from Alison, is it possible to do the baseline woodland condition assessment the year before year one of the management plan? We will struggle doing surveys during survey season to complete all woodland condition assessments across all sites in just 1 year. So splitting them into 2 would be very helpful.
So yeah, I'll pick this one up. So yes, if you've either done a woodland condition assessment recently, I say recently in terms of shortly before your agreement is going live, we would still accept that for the year one baseline. We are looking at the sequencing of when people can do that condition assessment as the first one, because in some ways we've set the capital up. It's not open at the moment, but we've set it up as a standalone capital item as well, so people can use that condition assessment to help inform their management plan. So we're looking at how the sequencing can best work when that capital application reopens. At the moment, you can apply for the capital funding via your higher tier. So that's the slight wrinkle. If you're looking for the funding to do it in year one, at the moment it's as part of your higher tier application until that capital only grant becomes available again, in which case you'll be able to do it in either. But to answer your question specifically, if you've done one recently, funded or unfundedly, so let's say within the last year or so of your agreement going live, we would accept that as part of your baseline.
Thanks, Rich. And thanks, everyone. I think that's all we had time for. I'll hand you over to Penny.
Yeah, thank you. And we've got through a lot of the questions, not quite all of them. So we'll have a look through them and make sure we're kind of either addressing them when we send information out more broadly on this, or pointing people to the guidance. And some of them are on species, which hopefully are covered in the species webinar as well, if you go back and have a look at that recording. So thank you very much for attending. We will be sharing the link to this afterwards, so you can listen back as well. And please do fill in the feedback form as well, because that will give us an idea about other things you want to know more about around this, and also any other topics as well. So thank you all very much for coming along today, and thank you for everybody that's presented and